Good afternoon. So yes, hopefully we will have a lively, informative, and interactive panel here. So I'd like to welcome up the panelists, George Bevis, founder and CEO of Tide, Karen Rudich, managing partner and co-founder of BiBox, Oliver Bussmann, founder and managing partner of Bussmann Advisory, and Sophie, Guibaud, managing director for Europe at Fidor. And I will now go to the far end. So this group collectively, you've just heard a number of names of the organizations that you're leading today, but again has experience and has worked to drive innovation at some of the largest banks and institutions in the market: BPC, Capital One, UBS, Barclays, BNP Paribas, Lloyds, partners like IBM and SAP. So I was wondering if we could start off for the audience by maybe unpacking your experience, the path that you've had, and what really banking innovation means to you, so that we have a level set as we begin the conversation. Maybe we'll start at the far end with you, George.
Sure. I should explain, I run Tide. If you don't know what Tide is a next generation banking service for small businesses that exists to save them time so they can get back to doing more of whatever it is that they love doing, and we all know what they love doing is not banking. I have a weird career up to this point. I've done my time in banking. I started at Capital One. I ran innovation for WorldPay when it was part of RBS. Latterly, I've been business strategy director at Barclaycard and product director at Zopa. So I've done my time, but I've also been an entrepreneur repeatedly. I've experienced a lot of the pains that entrepreneurs endure in running their businesses. And from a public policy perspective, before they went a little strange, I, in 2012, wrote the Labour Party's main book on small business policy, and in 2014, put together their network of a few hundred digital professionals. So that's my background, and it gives me a fairly unique perspective on banking innovation, because I spent so much time attempting to do it when I was a banker and entirely failing in all circumstances. So I'm something of a skeptic of the ability of bankers to at least come up with new, unique ideas that nobody's ever done before. I am, however, a big believer in the ability of even big banks to be successful. Well, some people would call them fast followers. I think that's a little optimistic, but at least sort of medium, slow followers.
Great. So Karen, maybe pick up on that theme of how you help some medium and slow followers speed things up.
So Karen Rudich, co-founder of Firedrake and BiBox, and I've been a banker and an engineer for my sins. I've been at UBS, BNP Paribas, Lloyds, HSBC, you name it, driving large-scale transformation programs, really, that have a P&L impact. So I've seen a slightly different side of innovation. I think it can be done inside of the banks, but you need very strong senior management leadership and board buy-in. But actually, you know, I think the speed of change needed a bit of an oomph, and that is one of the reasons why we created BiBox, which is a shared services platform that is there to integrate FinTech and vendor solutions into end-to-end business processes that can actually help banks deliver that at a much faster pace.
And Oliver?
Yeah, my name is Oliver Bussmann, and was over 30 years in the corporate business on the high-tech side with SAP and IBM, and on the financial service industry side with UBS, Allianz, and Deutsche Bank, running large-scale transformation as a global and group CIO at SAP, for example, and UBS. And now running my own advisory and consulting business, helping banks, high-tech firms to stay ahead of the digital disruption curve, to manage innovation with an impact, because my experience is going through the high-tech and financial service industry is a lot of nice innovation labs out there. It's a good marketing gig, but the impact in embracing what's out there in the community, startup community, in the different industries, ecosystem, and embracing that and putting this into your business development process and take ownership, etc., at the end drives impact, etc. So that, from my perspective, is my learning over the last few years, and now also practicing in the enterprise and startup business, is it has to be part of your normal DNA.
Great. And Sophie, a little bit about Fidor, BPC, and yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Sophie Guibaud. I'm Managing Director Europe for Fidor. So regarding banking innovation, there is really two points worth mentioning for Fidor. So Fidor is a digital bank that was launched back in 2007, and that took basically as a start a core banking system and built everything from scratch. And since the beginning, we have developed this middleware and collaborated with a lot of fintech companies dating back from 2010. So instead of deciding we would do everything by ourselves, we just focused on what we would do best, and then we partner up with other fintechs for the rest. So this is really the way we have driven innovation internally, and also through open banking platform, APIs-enabled platform that enables others to connect, and also to develop new services. On the other side, the model has actually evolved a little bit from a bank that still exists and that is still expanding to a solutions providers that enable banks to launch new digital banking solutions targeted to new target markets, but also can be new geographies. And we provide also some innovative solutions that can help them in an easy way to bring innovation. And I could mention, for example, our marketplace, which is called Fidor Market, and that basically enables the banks to distribute fintech services directly onto their platform for a one-stop shop banking experience for their clients.
Excellent. So I think in the introductions we've heard and introduced some of the underlying drivers, which are open banking, PSD2, GDPR, the overall movement, customer expectations and experiences really being set outside of the industry in the apps and services and global digital platforms that they engage with. Yesterday we heard some interesting metrics from Ant Financial, where their active users, they qualify as visiting their app 7 times per day, and again having huge volumes of transactions per second. So I think that that's some of the underlying imperative for innovation that we see at banks. But what are some of the capabilities or technologies or new business processes and new service mixes that banks are really trying to serve with this innovation? George, maybe you could pick up on, again, what are the elements that banks need to innovate? What are the capabilities that they need, the technologies, and what's the road there?
So the two capabilities, if you like, for want of a better term, that banks definitely bring to the table to innovate are bags of cash and, or at least the bigger banks have bags of cash, and lots of data. And they're usually highly skilled in utilizing at least the first of those, and not always the second. I think the capabilities that they sometimes have, and they always need to deliver great digital innovation, end up being primarily about human capital. It starts right at the top, right at the leadership of these companies that need to understand that all financial services companies will be fintech companies in a matter of not very many years, and they need to re-engineer their organizations to be fintechs sooner rather than later. And then it kind of cascades down. The truth is that if at the middle management layer the right people aren't in place, then you can hire as many consultants as you like, but you haven't got a chance of getting a meaningful project through that organization. I don't think it's the case that 100% of even the bigger banks will make it through the next decade. I think it is going to be the case that poorly managed banks will not be able to catch up. However, I think at least in the retail domain, I take a different view in B2B. I think in the retail domain, the challenge is durable. I would call that in the UK, Barclays actually have quite a good mobile app at this point already. It is not unachievable for big banks to get to a place that satisfies their customers.
Yeah. And Oliver, if you hear, as you just heard the phrase, bags of cash and all the data in the world, I think there's also a desire from the very top of most of these organizations to be innovative, to transform their platform, to really get ready for the next era. So if the resources are there, the elements are there, and the will is there, what's the challenge? Why is it happening? And is it still theater, as you had mentioned, or do you see real traction?
Since I left UBS, I met a lot of CEOs, also non-banks CEOs, and I would say the first critical point is leadership. So if the CEO is up to speed, is a strong believer that a good understanding about the market changes, where the business model maybe can evolve, understand maybe where the target state could be in the next few years, and outline this with the leadership team as part of their corporate strategy. That's a big step from my perspective, because if that mindset is not there, it's just waste of time. Because the organization is always looking at the top leaders to see how important is digitalization, how important is innovation, how important is to outline the future vision. Because right now, a lot of banks is just number crunching. Yeah, and from that perspective, leadership is one thing. Second is, as I said before, is putting this whole understanding, what's going in the market, into from ideation to execution into a business development process. To that leadership team is understanding, what are the trends, how this should be applied for their current and future business, clear accountability, how this should be test driven, and then the decision how this should be implemented in their product and service portfolio going forward. If you have that orchestration, similar that I see in the high-tech business, then the probability that you don't miss an important opportunity is pretty high.
Yeah, and that sounds to me like it's not just theater, that there's actual effort, actual strategy, a real focus today. And I think we've seen, of course, with the last wave, corporate venture capital efforts. Most of the large global banks have a corporate venture arm. They have an incubator. They have outpost offices in many of the hubs. Karen, with that kind of a mix and some of the issues and interests that Oliver just outlined, what do you see in the banks that you're working with?
So I think that, to me, is the first wave of banks attempting to try and integrate innovation in a faster pace, excuse me. But I think actually where we've seen a lot more successful integration of innovation is when it comes from the business. So the business heads, the ones who have a P&L impact and have that accountability, because that's where their priorities lie. So they will then take that leadership and drive it front to back, like you said, in their business development, because it's about their customers. They're at the front line. So I think that where we've seen a lot more success has been where actually it is the business people who embrace it. But also it's about the corporate culture. If your deliverables are to mitigate the risk to the bank, to make sure that nobody gets in the door and that you keep the lights on, it's going to be very difficult for you to then be able to integrate a side project that is going to have a conflicting interest in there that says, actually, we want you to be more open and your open platform, et cetera. So I think banks need to address it at both by having the heads of the business take charge in the execution of innovation, but also at being able to change the way that they do the performance management of their employees to be able to embrace that cultural change.
I think it's important because I think right now taking on a risk is not something that you get rewarded in a bank right now, because the risk appetite is pretty low. And that's the reason why I think you're absolutely right, Karen, that I think changing the culture to take on risk, to overcome administrative challenges. If you onboard a startup now looking from a procurement perspective, from a security, compliance, risk, you can kill all the good ideas in an early stage. So having, as you said, ownership and accountability and drive this idea is important, and encourage something like that, because there will be failures, and accepting those kind of failures is important to build a learning curve instead of avoiding that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I think you've just introduced several of the reasons why innovation is a challenge in our industry, and that is, of course, the role of the public sector, the regulator, supervisor. We're here in London, where the FCA has become a global model of how to streamline and engage and encourage innovation within the industry. They have a clear mandate for competition, which is, of course, makes this market a little different as well. At the IF, we work with banks and central banks and governments across 76 different markets, and so I think you see very different pictures as you move market to market. But I think that's been one of the real challenges, is you have a very highly regulated, supervised industry that's trying to move rapidly to a totally different technology stack in a marketplace that's being driven from outside. And so, just a question to the floor. I think if you ask the question, is it theater, is it real, the role of the public sector and engagement with the regulators and supervisors is an important part of that. So.
Yeah, but taking on even these priorities, I mean, like compliance, AML, like all that kind of thing, like actually innovation can come from that. I think, of course, customer experience is very important. It's top of mind of like all organizations, really. But there are a lot of fintechs innovating in the RegTech space, like in the compliance space, all these priorities for regulator, all these priorities for banks. And I think we are now seeing a new wave of startup and a new wave of collaboration where banks actually really understand how they can collaborate effectively with fintechs, reduce their cost, reduce the manual work, reduce their risk, and I think it's. Yeah, we are seeing very much this collaboration.
I think from a regulation point of view, it's changed a lot. I think jurisdiction matters, and I would say there are front-running regulators like the FCA, like the FINMA in Switzerland, MMS in Singapore, because they drive this also as a business development function. Because at the end, finding the right balance between protecting the investors and consumer, on the other side, allow an environment to explore new technology, and then also, which is really important, looking at the UK and Switzerland and Singapore to reduce uncertainty, because uncertainty is not good to attract business at the end. Capital, resources, talent to come in. And from that perspective, I would say those jurisdictions put a lot of effort to reduce the noise and attract business. And that drives, at the end, innovation and attract business.
Great. And I'd love to come back to some of those themes in a minute. Just a reminder for the audience, please submit your questions through the app. We have a couple starting to come through, and look forward to engaging with those in just a minute. So you had mentioned compliance RegTech, and I think that's an exciting area. At the IF, we're very excited with some of the breakthroughs that we hope will happen in AML, where today you see at a great expense, very little of the financial crime actually being blocked. So you have an admirable objective that I think all of industry and public sector is united in, but if we're only catching 2%, 5%, 7% of the financial crime at the current cost and de-risking, that's just not a good solution. So hopefully many new RegTech developments to come from London and other markets here. But if we could go back for a minute to that question of kind of what's the future state look like, and what do we think that the landscape for financial services looks like in 10 years, and will are banks on a track to innovate and change? So maybe George, starting with you, of that vision, what's the next technology mix? What do these experiences look like, and what are the key pieces to have in place?
So I think there's a big difference between how the industry will evolve for consumer-facing banking versus business-facing banking. In consumer-facing banking, it is clearly the case that there are some new banks who've got great experiences, which everyone knows are a bit better than the existing banks, and there's a hope that they will get better still. But nevertheless, nobody's yet hit upon the golden idea that makes consumer banking with the new banks sort of 10x better than what was there before. And there are particular reasons why you might choose some of them. I personally have accounts with one of them, and I like it a lot. So I don't want to be seen to be dissing them, but the vision of marketplace banking has to deliver more than it's currently obvious that it will for the consumer banks to be truly game-changing. I think we expect something different to happen in business banking. In business banking, the opportunity is to build services which are not just about the banking bit, but they're about doing performing useful services with data and information to achieve an objective. That could be making it easy to improve the cash flow of small businesses, or as in our case, it's to give time back to the people who run them by doing things like automating bookkeeping and making it easy to manage staff expenses, and lots of other things. In business banking, I think it would be very surprising if in 10 years' time the big legacy banks who typically have never made very much money in small business banking are still the dominant players in that space, because not just Tide, but there will be other companies like us as well who will have launched a set of experiences which save so much time for SMEs. So actually it'd be crazy to continue to use a legacy bank. Final point is to note that, of course, small businesses are highly rational as well. So brand loyalty is not going to be a reason why they stick around with old banks in the way that they might have as consumers.
Yeah. Oliver, you're spending most of your time now focused on another new driver in the industry, and that's distributed ledger crypto technology.
Yep.
And there's a question from the crowd about what's the change to the future of investment banking as well. So maybe some comments about these new distributed technologies, the ecosystem that you see growing up, and how investment banking business will
I think several topics. Definitely, if you look at the distributed technology, especially from a distributed ledger perspective, it will simplify and streamline the existing business. So we know that the efficiency gains, we're talking about 90 to 100 billion just in the payment area, trading area, trade finance, exchange, etc., in simplifying the market infrastructure, processes, etc. And I believe those numbers will come through. So it's an efficiency play. Number two is there's a growth opportunities out there because we are living in vertical silos today from an industry perspective that new ecosystems will evolve round about, according to the World Bank, 12 ecosystem around housing, mobility, B2B, B2C, wealth, etc. that cross-industries players are coming together using distributed ledger, smart contracts, IoT to connect services that are not available today, digitalize that, provide new services around that, and that would generate around about 50 trillion plus US dollars new business in the next 10 years, and I can see it. I'm involved in projects that banks now teaming up with utility, phone, and other industries to bring define a new customer experience, a new customer service, etc. And that's only possible because the technology is there. From an investment banking perspective, my prediction, the whole IPO business is already going through, in the next 12 to 24 months, a major disruption. I've been through a lot of initial coin offerings to issue at the end kind of security or utility token, and it becomes the best of the IPO best practice, how you do it from orchestration, because it's becoming institutional fundraising, book building, pricing, combined with the digital platform that is a fraction of effort and cost to do so in the traditional IPO environment. So I can see the best of becoming a hybrid model. And if you're not going through that learning curve as a bank, and know what are the best practices, process, who are the players, new ecosystem coming up, you miss an opportunity. There are small boutiques already, banking boutiques, going into exactly the bridge between the token world and the traditional world. And they're making a lot of money already. And so from that perspective, I think we will see this business will mature, the best practices will come in, and the regulators are now putting already efforts in there to mature, standardize that business, because we know that this access to capital will something that I want to continue, because it gives access to risk capital to startups that today it's very hard to do so going through venture capital business.
Yeah. Karen, did you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to build a little bit on what you've said. It's around, in the future, it's around bridging the traditional with the future. It's around collaboration. It's around, open source technologies, but actually within the confines of a regulated industry. It's about very much banks still focusing on what they do best, but also being able to get around their legacy challenges. And I think this is right. This is where platform economies come into play. This is where you've got a lot of facilitation and distribution models that are coming in that are able to challenge the barriers of entry for fintechs. And I think really, to me, that is where the future is. I think banks will continue to be as strong as they are today. But I think they will, the wave of change that we're going through means that they're going to be a lot more open towards utilizing technologies and players out there that will help them do that instead of self-building.
But I think it's important to mention, I think we are moving away from just a tech discussion into a much more sophisticated business model discussion that I've been through a lot of board meetings and executive meetings that is so what does it mean for my current setup? Is my business model sustainable? What else I have to discuss? So because assuming the knowledge is there, now understanding what kind of tech possibilities out there, then you have that discussion and see where you want to play, how you want to team up, how your current business model, because a lot of stuff is being digitalized what we have currently. And that's not it will not be the status quo going forward. Yeah.
And I would like to jump in here because this is a bit what we have been doing with Fidor and what we are advocating, right? Like Fidor is a regular bank, but since like the beginning has been playing around like different business model. And when we are mentioning like more partnership with FinTech, different ways of distribution, different ways of business model, this is where we really believe the future is for banks to actually distribute other FinTech products and make revenues out of that, like affiliation revenues, revenue shares, things like that. We can also mention PSD2 actually, because PSD2 is a massive opportunities for actually new revenues, not within the APIs that are like part of PSD2, but by monetizing premium APIs. So banks can really open up and find new revenue streams, which in a context where margins are more and more stretched, is actually welcome.
So that's a good segue to a clear crowd favorite question here. This crowd really wants you to name names. So they'd like to hear who your favorite or best example of a bank that is succeeding at innovation. Anybody have a candidate they want to propose?
So I'm a big fan of Barclays. I think because A, I was there, but B, so I've been in a lot of places, so I'm not sure that counts.
Everyone's talking their book.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess I'm just talking from experience. So I've got 5 different bank accounts as a business owner, and I get my best from Barclays right now because I get to see all my personal and all my SME accounts. It's also caters to my digital expectations as a consumer who's quite digitally interactive. When I was there, we also had a lot of change and transformation coming in from the board, from the CEO. Ashok Vaswani was a great proponent of digitalizing his business, putting the customer at its heart, and it wasn't just lip service. So that is where a lot of the products that are coming out now are on the back of that. And I think it was a great example of a corporate culture that went from the top down at really driving change and innovation and transformation.
So George, any dissenting votes or anything?
I was thinking, Karen, if you think Barclays have got the best business account out there, I can maybe suggest a different one. But actually, technically, Tide is not a bank, so we operate under an e-money license, so we're sort of out of this discussion. But of the big banks, I would agree. For UK, Barclays are ahead. They're just better on digital stuff than the other big banks. Of the smaller banks across the whole of Europe, actually, I think in consumer, what Monzo have achieved in terms of building a brand and a brand experience is quite extraordinary. Mm-hmm. I'm not aware of anyone ever in the whole of financial services who've ever done such an amazing job on a brand experience as what they've achieved.
Oliver, your
no, I think staying out of the naming banks, I think 2 markets that I'm watching closely beside the UK is the Spanish market, because they already started 10 years ago in cleaning up their house from a legacy perspective and also embracing the FinTech community investments, try to bring in and they have a clear understanding where their business model want to go. They want to go from a business model. The second, from an emerging market in Europe, I think spent a lot of time in Turkey, and from a digitalization point of view, using mobility, trying out different services, embracing other industries, pretty progressive. And I was really surprised, positively speaking, the progress and how the way they embraced digital changes.
And Sophie.
Yeah, well, Fidor, of course. But no, like maybe a point on SME banking, because I think a lot of things are happening, and I think actually like going to the point of George, there is quite a few players coming up, but what I think is super interesting is to see like the different models, the different target markets that are being addressed. So there is like Tide, for example, with smaller companies, like Civilized Bank for bigger companies, and we really see like, I find more innovation in terms of serving customer needs than in retail, because I have the feeling that in retail it's a bit more standardized, while in SMEs there is so much basically different range of companies that have different needs, and I find really exciting this sector.
Great.
And these new banks coming up here.
Okay. Well, we're just about to close out of time, but maybe a speed round. We'll go down the line here, and as we look at a future, again, defined by smart cities, advanced sensors, facial recognition technology, all sorts of automation solutions, blockchain and crypto solutions might come on board. We didn't even talk about what quantum computing might do to the future. So again, that question, we looked 10 years down the line, and do we think that banks are doing what they need to be the player? Are they going to be there? Are they going to be serving the same role in our life? And so a quick thumbs up, thumbs down as we run down the line. Innovation or theater? A strategy or theater, I'm sorry.
I think there's a lot of theatre. I don't think enough of them are doing enough.
I think it's becoming strategy. They just need a good platform to leverage off and integrate that strategy. So product plug, BiBox.
No, definitely. I think they have to embrace to stay ahead of the curve. So that's my view.
So strategy. Okay.
I think like all the things that have been done over the past few years, like all the tests and trials show like a big willingness for them to do it. So I really hope that within 10 years they will find out the magical way to do it.
Excellent. Well, a big round for our panel. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.